Central's been at the head of the class when it comes to coming up with new and innovative ways to suppress fires. Jim has just been recently promoted to, what was that title again, Jim?
Marketing director.
He's the marketing director now for Central Sprinkler. So this is the guy to call. I hope he brought a stack of cards with him tonight to pass out, because I'm sure at least, what, 56, 58 cards? I hope you brought it. And Jim has been very knowledgeable. I've called Jim in the past whenever I've had some specific application problems or questions. And he's the guy we wanted, and here he is. Jim Brunetti, please welcome him.
Everybody see that?
Still going.
Okay, thanks a lot, Phil. I appreciate it. I love coming to Minnesota. A lot of great contractors out there, a lot of great authorities having jurisdictions. We seem to do a lot of good business out here, and we really have a great reputation of getting the new products out there, and this is one of the areas in the country that seems to always be right in the front line. So I want to thank you on behalf of Central for inviting us out here to allow us to talk to you about a couple of things. And as Phil said, we really do feel we are the industry leader when it comes out with new things. But there's been a couple other things in the news lately that, sure, I'd love to just, I think it will be very informative. First thing we'll talk about is the Omega sprinkler. All right, if we just sit in our hands and say, oh, the sky's falling, we committed a group of individuals to deal with the problem we were talking about. But still, we are a company, a progressive company, that knows there's other things we can do out there. What I would like to direct the rest of this meeting towards, because we've got all kinds of new products out there, but I really want to stick with storage applications. Specifically warehouse type applications with everything from early suppression fast response to extra large orifice type technology. Just to refresh a little bit, I know I've spoken with many of you before on some of these issues, but the new things that we came out with didn't just, basically get here because of, this was a good idea. It came in incremental steps. At one point, fire protection started off as a perforated pipe. It moved on to a standard sprinkler, like a half-inch that we're all very familiar with. And then a great new concept called the 17/32-inch orifice sprinkler was evolved. That sprinkler and the half-inch sprinkler is pretty much what defined the codes that you and I work in up to this day. And specifically, I'm talking about the current 231 and 231C storage type NFPA requirements. That was great. I mean, those codes were established, the densities were created back in the late 60s, early 70s, again, to what we're using now. But Central had an idea that simply by making a slightly larger orifice sprinkler, you can create equal to or better fire protection. Equal to or better fire protection is something that we must provide when we come out with something new. It's got to at least be as good as what was out there, but our goal is to make it absolutely better fire protection than what's been out there. And that's what I'm going to try to display to you tonight. To do that, we had to go out and take our product and say, we can do at least what you could do before with the existing 17/32-inch sprinklers. So we tested the worst commodity out there, not counting flammable liquids or aerosols. Okay, the meanest, baddest storage application is Group A plastics, no question about it. A 30-gallon container or garbage can contains the equivalent fuel load of a gallon of gasoline. All right, and when you've got 5, 6, 7 of these things stacked up together, right next to 5, 6, 7 of them stacked up to 15, 20 feet, That's a lot of fuel load out there. That's why those fires are so big. This room, light hazard, we're looking at a 0.1 density, or 1/10 of a gallon per minute on the floor. These need absolute minimum of 0.6 of a gallon, or 0.6 density. Now, if you took a 1 foot by 1 foot square, and you would pour a half a gallon of milk on that square for 1 minute, you'd get a 0.5 density, or 5/10 of a gallon per minute. That's a lot of water. That's 500% more than you get out of these sprinklers here. In the case of Group A plastics, you're going to 6/10, so that's a lot of water you're getting out of those sprinklers. We basically repeated the exact test that they established the codes we're used to. This is a plan view of an actual warehouse configuration. Okay, I know it's kind of hard to see. I'll try to talk you through it. Basically, what you see in the middle here is a standard double row rack array. Okay, in this case it was 15-foot high Group A plastics. To the left and right of that rack array is what they call target and face arrays. Easy way to explain that is when they light a fire inside of a rack assembly, okay, could be storing anything from fur coats to plastic jars to whatever. That thing starts to burn, and it starts to kick off. I'm telling you, these fires are huge. We'll look at one in a little bit. There are 8-foot aisle spaces between the face and target array. If the commodity burning should spill out of those cartons and ignite any of these other arrays, or the fire jumps laterally, that's an absolute failed fire test. That's how they're able to do that. Instead of building an entire warehouse filled up with commodity, they just make a standard storage array and then put a face and target, to see if the fire is going to jump. All these little dots here represents sprinklers spaced at 100 square feet, or 10 by 10, standard storage spacing. Started the fire kicked up, got going pretty good, sprinklers started to operate. All these little green dots you see on here are operated sprinklers during the fire. This is the fire that determined the density and code requirements that you're using right now. When you go to your Group A plastic, you follow your chart down there in 231C, you say, okay, here's what I got to do, and this is why. 29 sprinklers operated in this fire. Okay, remember it's 0.6 density. That's a lot of water, that's a lot of pressure to push out of those sprinklers. 29's head operated. It's 10 feet on center between sprinklers. Now here's the point of ignition. You got 5, 15, 25, 35, 45 feet away from the point of ignition, you had an operated sprinkler. Now, if you've got a warehouse full of fur coats or whatever, that's not good. And that's also a lot of water that you're putting down on the commodity. 1,740 gallons per minute is flowing down out of those 29 open sprinklers. Okay, but that's okay. That's a pass test, and that's why you have a 4,000 square foot design area for this type of commodity classification. All right, it's based on performance-based testing. So 1,740 gallons, 29 sprinklers, got a big enough design area, you can protect that commodity. We went in, same exact spacing, except we used a different sprinkler called an ELO, and in our case it's the ELO 231. ELO stands for extra large orifice compared to the LO, or large orifice, that you use on the 1732. Okay, that ELO sprinkler is 0.64 1/100ths of an inch. A very large orifice sprinkler. Started the fire. These blue dots here, 1, 2, 3, 4 sprinklers operated, killed the fire. Kill the fire. 240 gallons per minute were flowing out of those sprinklers. That's a 1,500 GPM savings, if you will, if you're trying to save water, going with that type of sprinkler compared to the traditional or 17/32 sprinklers. Talked a little bit about equal to or better fire protection. This is a time temperature curve. This curve basically up at the ceiling, up at the deck where you're flowing all these sprinklers, they have things called thermocouples. And thermocouples is nothing more than an electronically monitored thermometer at the ceiling where the sprinklers are, so you know how hot it is at the ceiling. This red represents how hot it was when those 29 sprinklers eventually operated. At 2 minutes, the fire spiked to 1,600 degrees. It was as high as 1,900 degrees 9 minutes into the fire at the ceiling. That's almost 2,000 degrees at the ceiling, at your trusses, at your wood deck. That's bad. But eventually the sprinklers, enough of them operated. Remember, we had 29s. You saw how many of them? I mean, one up to 45 feet away. What you saw here, eventually at 15 minutes, the ceiling temperature got down to about 500 degrees. But, at 2 minutes before that, it was still over 1,000 degrees. What you had and why you saw so many sprinklers open is a concept called adjacent cooling. The first ring, or like the four that's around the point of ignition, they operate, the water comes down, it hits that roiling fire plume, and it just kind of misses the water that comes down. I mean, the water's getting there, but it's not punching through. It's not penetrating the plume. All right? So now a next ring of sprinklers open, right? And they're kind of going through the same deal. In this case, you had at least 3 rings open. After 3 rings, you usually lose the building. You just can't have that many open sprinklers. But what was happening in that rack array, that adjacent cooling, water was able to cool the side adjacent areas of where the fire and just kind of start creeping up on it. And eventually just cooling the bottom of the fire, and then the sprinklers over was able to start punching through. With the ELO 231 sprinkler, at 2 minutes, the temperature spiked to a little under 900 degrees. At 3 minutes, it was over. I'm sorry, at 1 minute it was 900 degrees. At 2 minutes, it was over. Those 4 sprinklers operated, boom, punched the fire. At 2 minutes, the ceiling temperature was 200 degrees. Okay, that's just a lot of hot smoke up there. And they shut down the test after 15 minutes. They were just flowing water. Okay, equal to or better fire protection? Absolutely. No question that ELO is better fire protection than a 1732nd application. And I talked about adjacent cooling and plume penetration. The ELO type sprinkler, it's not technically classified as a large drop sprinkler, but the droplets are large. And they're able, based on, with the pressures for 0.6 density, to punch through that plume and put the water where you need it. Put the water on the fire at the base, at the burning commodity. That's why the sprinkler operates so well. So this concept's been around for about, it's been established for about 5 years now. We've had a D64 for almost a decade. But until we got a specific listing, the results were so dramatic, we're able to do the exact same thing and then take the design area down to 2,000 square feet. That's half the remote area than you had before. That's 20 sprinklers to calculate instead of 40. Okay. The other thing we got to do as a manufacturer is worry about economics. That's great, it's good fire protection, but I need the lowest price possible. I need to save money to use this particular thing. Well, because of that large orifice, you're not trying to squeeze a bunch of water through a little tiny orifice. In a half-inch sprinkler at 0.6 density, you need about 115 pounds of pressure to operate that sprinkler. That's not even considered. With a 1732nd, you're about 55 psi to operate. 55 psi. That's a lot of pressure, and 50 pounds is pump country. That means plan a pump into the bed. With that ELO's 0.64/100ths of an orifice, you need half the amount of pressure. In this case, 27.7 psi. And you can take that down, like let's say a 0.45 density, a very common application in a lot of commodities. You only need about 15.5 pounds end head pressure for that sprinkler. So it's definitely a savings, and that's what we're out there to do. So we're not selling the sprinkler, we're selling the savings. We're also selling the pressure savings. Because when you can reduce your pressure, in this case, take it down to half, you can reduce your pipe sizes. You can reduce the amount of sprinklers you have to actually have. If you were worried about pressure on a 17/32 inch sprinkler, you could take down the spacing, right? I've only got 30 pounds. If I take down the spacing to, let's say, 72 square feet, I only need 27 pounds to operate. With the ELO, you can leave that sprinkler spaced at 100 square feet and still need less pressure to operate than a standard sprinkler at 72 square feet. So that saves you 28 square feet per head. And what that means, and let's say a 40,000 square foot warehouse, that is a tiny warehouse, but that's a good number. You save 155 sprinklers on the bottom line. That's 155 heads off your head count because you were able to keep your spacing at the maximum and lose nothing because the pressure was still the same. In fact, 1 pound less. So that's kind of how we got into this new generation of sprinklers, specifically storage. Well, that was 5 years ago. We've now come up with a whole new generation. Start off with this little guy right here. This little sprinkler is the largest control sprinkler in the world. It's a K17. And that's just what it is. It's a K factor of 17. Huge works. This thing, it's so versatile, we were able to get a number of applications with this sprinkler. We have 2 specific applications. What that means is it saves you in-rack sprinklers. And we have, of course, our storage application with this. I just got done bragging about that ELO 231 and how much pressure you can save, and it's absolutely amazing and all this good stuff. 0.6 density with a K17 requires an end head pressure of 12.5 pounds. That is nothing water. That's light hazard pressure for 0.6 density storage. If you go down to a 0.45 density, I always like to go there because that seems to be a very, very common density. You need the absolute minimum of 7 psi. For storage, 7 psi. But we've got some specific applications. The first one I'm going to talk about is our factory mutual specific application. I highly encourage all of you people who work with storage to consider the factory mutual specific application because it saves you 5 heads in your design area. Okay, that's a quick little reference tool for you. You can go to 30-foot buildings, 25 foot of storage. That's 5 feet higher than we had with our other specific application across the board. We were limited to 25 foot buildings, 20 foot storage. Now you can go 5 and 5 higher. 22 psi, which gives you a 0.8 density. It's ESFR water for control sprinkler with only 15 sprinklers flowing in the design area. 1,500 square foot design area. No in-rack sprinklers. 22 psi means you probably will not have a pump. So you're saving the pump, the in-racks, and it's extremely low pressure. Almost suppression type water. The specific application for Underwriters Laboratory is basically the same thing. You're getting 0.8 of a gallon per minute, but they want a 2,000 square foot design area. That's why I strongly encourage you to consider the factory mutual version because it's a direct cost savings, or it's a direct savings of calculated sprinkler. You're getting no less protection. We did so much testing at Factory Mutual to get these things through. 70 square feet minimum on these sprinklers. That's a much bigger difference than what you're used to seeing for these specialized type sprinklers. ESFR and larger drop with their 80 square foot minimum. This really able to help you when you've got some spacing concerns. Let's say you have an obstruction or that you have a branch line too close to a wall. You can take down your spacing plus 7 psi on your storage type application. And this is what I mean by the storage. You can use the sprinkler, which is available in upright and pendant. Okay, we're not limiting the style. You can use it just as a regular standard sprinkler up there, regular ceiling sprinkler. Regardless of how high the building is, what your commodity is, there can be some cases, there's a lot of old warehouses out there that's built over 45 feet. And when you have a building that you're storing something, traditionally the owner really likes to store as high as they can get, right? So you have to accommodate that. As a standard sprinkler, you still would have to apply the 231 and 231C codes. But remember, for your very large density requirements, a 17 K factor is very, very beneficial. Again, as I was talking about 0.6, you only need 12 and a half pounds. And you can still use the sprinkler as a specific application we had with that old technology I was just talking about, the ELO 231. You can replace that. So that's a 0.6 over 2, or a 0.6 of a gallon density over 2,000 square feet. So it's a big, big savings.
Are there pipe size limitations in the upright position?
You do have to follow NFPA 13. The 3-inch now, you have to make sure you clear that. But if you use a pendant, that goes away. So that's a real good question too, because the 96 has really addressed the obstruction criteria specifically for piping. Only thing it does not affect is attic sprinklers. That's another class, or another topic. ESFR technology. I'm sorry.
You said it can be saved in the next sprinklers?
Yes, specific application eliminates it.
For only specific, because if you follow NFPA, not come out, these things.
We have a test report that specifically words that. We've been working with the testing agencies long enough now to say, look, this time when you write your report, so we don't have all this confusion out there, make sure you say this eliminates the in-rack sprinklers, because when our original ELO 231, it didn't come out like that. It just talked about the test, and it was referring you back to 231, not 231C, even though it could eliminate the in-rack sprinklers. So we had to go back and get further language on it. But yes, absolutely, specific applications, get rid of your racks. Nobody likes racks if you own a building, if you own a warehouse, and you got to periodically go back and move your configurations around. They're just a pain. Eliminating that saves a bunch of dollars off the bottom line. Now, moving away from control sprinklers.
Is that just for double row or double row racks, single row?
All.
What about multi row?
Multi? All.
All racks.
All racks.
Solid shells.
No. It's solid shells. All racks.
One more question before you go away from those. Is there any restrictions on the distances between the commodity, the top of the storage and the, I mean, if you go to plastics, you've got 5 foot, less than 5 foot, 10. You're talking now about a 30-foot high building. Does it have to be 25-foot storage, or can it be 18-foot storage in a 30-foot building? Are there any restrictions on that?
That's a great question, Scott. I was talking about a little bit earlier that issue has not yet been resolved by 231 yet on commodity distance. Yet that's still a battle. They're trying to figure that out, because as we've seen, sometimes when you have less storage, the fire is worse, because that fire can start to spread out. Instead of where if you have storage where the top of the boxes are sitting right underneath the sprinklers, let's say 5 feet, where you get a nice plume coming up that vertical space and activating the sprinklers fairly well. It's something that it's still an issue for 231. Our spacing and obstruction criteria will be per the existing codes.
So 10-foot maximum is going to be the,
Yes.
you can't have 11 or 12 from the sprinklers to the top of the commodities.
It's how you would interpret the existing codes. I mean, we'd help out a customer and try to say, look, based on our testing, we think it will work fine. We actually did a 9-foot test, and it worked. 9-foot test in a 30-foot building. I think that pretty much answers that situation, and it actually was a Group A plastic and a flammable liquid. But that was kind of for performance-based testing on a different issue. Great point, though. because that battle is still out there, and that's really, the entire industry is dealing with that particular situation. I did want to transition to ESFR. I'm going to be the first one to say that this is absolutely the best protection out there. It is suppression. Early suppression, fast response. Should have wrote it down on my wrist. ESFR. Well, right now, ESFRs, if you go to 30-foot-1 building or 30-foot-6 you are required to calculate 75 psi for the end head pressure. That's just the way it is. Once you go over 30 feet, you're stuck. 75 psi. At a 30-foot building and less, you must provide 50 psi. Great sprinkler. It's the only suppression market out there. No question, it's the best thing to protect things outside of flammable liquids and aerosols. Now, there's a new ESFR out there. It's called the K25.
I want to go back to the building heights.
Yes.
Suppose you have a situation where one end of the building is about 32 feet and the other end of the building is 28 feet. And you want an ESFR system. Do you calculate the heads that are at over 30 at 75 and the ones that are under at 50, or what's your recommendation?
You got a 32-foot building, I would have to just say you got to calculate at 75 psi.
So take the worst case, worst height.
And it's probably not a popular concept, but I'm basing that based on the guy who sets the rules, Joe Hankins with Factory Mutual. And if you ask him the same thing, it's 32-foot building. You got to go. It's over 30 feet. Go to 75 psi. But there's a new ESFR out there. The Central's K25 Ultra ESFR. It's just that. It's a K25. It's a 25 K factor. Here's a half-inch orifice. Here is a K25. It's a 1-inch orifice sprinkler. Okay? Things have changed in the last couple of years. This sprinkler allows you to do things you've never seen in storage. Bottom line, because of the orifice size, you flow actually 13 gallons per minute that you would from a K14 sprinkler and still save 30 psi. In a 30-foot building, it's a 20-pound ESFR. All right? I mean, 20 psi is all you need. What that does for you, let's just take a primary path here, hydraulic primary path. And with a K14 ESFR sprinkler, you got to have that 50 psi in head pressure. You got about 30 feet of elevation, roughly about 13 psi, plus 20 pounds of friction loss in your pipe, your valves, your fittings, your pertinences. You're looking at an absolute minimum of 83 pounds to operate that sprinkler before you even start your design. 83 pounds. That effectively equals one fire pump to go with that design. And we've been doing that for quite some time. Same primary path. The variables are pretty much the same, except you hack 30 pounds off the bottom line. A 50-pound startup pressure is very doable. It can eliminate fire pumps in the majority of the systems out there.
Is it accepted?
Pardon?
Is it accepted by the court?
Absolutely.
It says you got to have 50 psi.
It's a new technology, new product. It's like our ELO 231, where you could operate that sprinkler at 10 psi. It's part of that NFPA that says new technology is welcome, and as long as you prove it. And that's where we're at right now. We've done all the fire tests, we've done all the flow tests, we've done all the mechanical tests. All we're waiting on now is for Factory Mutual to adopt the new technology language, and they have to adopt it. So we're done. We're just waiting on FM. What you get out of this thing, besides it being only a 20 psi ESFR, in a 30-foot building, is all other design criteria for ESFRs apply to this sprinkler. So it's essentially just a low-pressure ESFR with one minor difference. Has an 18-inch deflector distance. And ESFRs, in a lot of cases with structural members, let's say the one I used to run into a lot is an 8-inch Z purlin. You got that 8-inch Z, then a 2.5-inch piece of pipe welded and that big old ESFR sprinkler in it. You're looking at 14.75 or 15 inches to the deflector, which is outside of the absolute maximum of 14 inches. Now, because of the testing of this sprinkler, you've been given some design flexibility with an extra 4 inches of, so you can pretty much, at 18 inches, you can pretty much make that work. Because of performance-based testing in the current ESFR, or the K14 ESFR, we went ahead and said, look, Factory Mutual is taking these sprinklers to a newer height. It's causing a lot of pressure. Why don't we do the same thing? That way we have a one-for-one. If that ESFR can do something, we can do it. And of course, our benefit will be a lot less pressure. So what we did is we went out, Factory Mutual, they built us a 45-foot structure, right? Basically, they built us a platform to put the rack array. I talked about the racks earlier, and lit it on fire, and see what happens when the doggone thing went up. They were a little bit concerned because it was 40 feet of storage. 40 feet of Group A plastics. That's a whole lot of storage out there. We did it with 18-inch deflector distance, and we had extremely successful testing. Each tier level is 5 feet. It keeps going, and going, and going. 40 feet of storage. Inside of each one of these cartons is 125 polystyrene jars that burn like hell when you light them on fire. These are K25 ESFRs installed at 18 inches below the deck. Now what's going to be kind of surprising here is that this is real-time video. This is how fast it goes up, as long as the computer doesn't lock up. Now, Factory Mutual was so concerned about this commodity, they did a couple of things. Number one, remember I talked about the target array before? They didn't put a Group A commodity in that. They figured if this went up, they didn't want more stuff burning. So they put Group 2 instead of Group A plastic. Then they install, that is fast. And then we had 4 operate here, 2 more operated for a total of 6. You can see that good flow. There's another view that's a little bit better. Inside of a minute and a half, we lost visual contact because of all the smoke in there. See how fast that went? Yes, sir.
When Factory Mutual does their testing, they do it without roof venting. Is that correct?
They do have a vent system. It's not as sophisticated as the Underwriters Laboratory positive pressure recirculating type deal. But Factory Mutual basically has vents that, after the fire.
After the fire itself.
Yes.
But during the sprinkler operation, they are not venting the roof.
No.
Correct?
You run like hell. After the thing starts going, you get out of that test area after about a minute because there's a lot of water.
Right.
And also there's a heck of a lot of smoke in there.
Well, my question is when Factory Mutual approves that sprinkler for use in that type of storage, they would not approve it with roof vent. Is that correct? Do they specifically indicate that you should not have automatic roof vents?
No, we'll fall under the same category as existing ESFRs. All criteria for existing ESFRs, including the exception for roof ventings, will apply to the K25. Because we've actually gone above what the existing K14 ESFRs have done. But that fire that you saw, and you mentioned the vents and how much smoke gets in there, that fire burnt for 7.5 minutes. Remember, it's a suppression sprinkler. So even though it knocked that plume all the way down to the second and third tier, you saw how fast it moved up the flue space? Well, at the second and third tier, it had burned right through the cardboard and involved about 25 cartons, fully involved the plastic. I've got other stuff. You can see the melting plastic and everything. It took 7 minutes till you eventually got suppression. Now here's another fire test. I know fire tests are kind of boring and stuff, but this is the exact same fire test, except it's taken from the other side. Here is that target array. The difference with this fire test than you would on the ones I've talked about earlier is for ESFRs, you only have a 4-foot aisle space. And with that fire as big as it got, you can see how you start getting real nervous of it jumping over. If it involves that array at all, it's a failed test. Also, Factory Mutual was so concerned that this fire could get away from them. What they did was install a row of current K14 ESFRs at the middle level that they controlled from their lab in case the sprinklers didn't work. See that great pattern you're getting out of these ESFRs here? And it just kills that fire. See how it pushes it down the vertical flue space? And you can also see how close the fire is getting to that target array. So that amount of water, that is a heck of a lot of water at 50 psi. Nothing's getting by that. Based on a series of tests that we did, we were able to do something that's a little bit different for ESFRs. Since we went to the highest you could get, 45-foot building, 40-foot storage, we also tested, in increments down. Now with ESFRs, instead of, and Phil, you mentioned it earlier, what if I have a 32-foot building on one end? This ties right into incremental stages of storage. If you have a 32-foot building, you would just round up, well, you need 30 psi end head pressure to operate that sprinkler. And that goes all the way up to a 45-foot building. So it's a set pressure based on a 5-foot increment. So that gives you a lot of design flexibility. Absolutely, no in-racks. Performance-based testing is what drives our market. I told you we went and did the 45-foot building testing based on existing K14 ESFRs. Well, they tested theirs too and got an absolute successful pass test. Their deal is that a 35-foot storage level with a 45-foot building, you must have 90 psi end head pressure. All right? And if you go as high as Central's K25 sprinkler can go, you need 90 psi in head pressure with 50 psi in rack sprinklers. Quick response, large orifice, in rack sprinklers. For those of you who have balanced ceiling calcs with rack calcs, it's a lot different when you're talking 90 and 50. I mean, that's quite a nightmare. Why would you do that? Because you could go with the K25 sprinkler, and regardless of the ceiling height, you have a set pressure. It's end head pressure. You're done. No in racks, and with the great possibility of eliminating the pump. Okay. Any questions on the K25 server?
You're still talking 4-head 3-line?
Yes. Same calculation procedure. Good question. Yes, sir.
Anything going on with ESFR technology and freezers and cooler applications where you have a dry system reaction?
I tell you, the codes have caught on. Pre-action has been exposed. For years you had a set system volume you could go to, and the way to get around it was to go with like a pre-action way. And most people knew how to deal with that and say, well, I can increase my sizes and only have one system instead of having 4 systems just by going with pre-action. But the 96 code says, no, you got to consider that system just like you would a dry system and increase the design area. Your specific question about in freezers, no, not yet. These are wet systems that must be installed on the pendants. Now, where you can take advantage of low pressure sprinklers is, I mean, already start thinking about the K-17. I mean, it's just as applicable for dry systems as any other sprinkler out there, with a much lower end head pressure requirement. Your design area is going to be substantial, because the bottom line, with those big fires, with what we just saw, how fast they move, how much heat they apply to the ceiling, sprinklers start popping, the elements start popping like popcorn. The best test I ever saw when I was in Factory Mutual, it was for large drop sprinklers, and they were doing a cold storage test, as a matter of fact, and they wanted to simulate a dry systems. They lit 35 foot of storage on fire, and next thing you know, you kept hearing these clinking sounds, and it was the elements popping and falling down, raining down. Because after the first one operated is when they said, okay, wait 1 minute to simulate a dry system with water getting from the valve to the actual system. Over 70 sprinklers operated. That was a failure. It was a big time failure. So you do have to increase your design areas whenever you talk about dry and freezers.
New sprinklers to 31. Are those RTI same as the old sprinklers?
The RTI is the same for that temperature range.
They are not quick response.
No. What I was just saying about the dry sprinklers, that test I went to, we thought we were a bunch of smart guys when we first came out with the K-17, and because QR is so big now in light hazard and ordinary hazard, I mean, it's huge with the 96 adoption. We figured, hey, we'll just keep the tradition going, and it'll be great for storage too. Too many sprinklers operating. In storage, because of the type of fires, that's why you see the higher temperatures and the larger bulb sizes. I mean, just too many sprinklers operate. With that amount of heat that quick, you could end up with a very large system. And when you go dry, forget it. There's just you have to increase your design area tremendously. Sir.
Do they come in upright?
Yes. Yes. The K25 or K17? K25. No, we only have the pendant K25, just like the existing ESFRs. We have a competitor that does have an upright ESFR, and it's an 11 K factor series. So you don't see it that much, but there is an ESFR out there that is an upright. Sir.
What's the thread size? 1 inch?
This one is 1 inch. I mean, the orifice size is 1 inch, and then this one would be your traditional 3/4 inch. Good point. Last thing I want is to order a bunch of straps and you get these things on a job, you know, and you go like, it won't fit that guy. Any other questions on our storage type applications?
What type of marking do you have on there so that when the inspector shows up, he's guaranteed that the fitter put the right head in the right place at the right time?
You mean for ESFRs?
Yeah, all these heads look alike.
Well,
And,
the deflector, they're stamped, and
yeah, but now you're talking 35 feet in a dark warehouse in December that's unheated. And you're going to climb up there and adjust your trifocal to read that thing? I know, I mean, there are inspectors around here that will make you do that.
I understand. I'm not sure how we can get away from, what we've been doing for the last century. I realized before it was just half-inch and 17/32 inch sprinklers. But now, I mean, before you put a building into occupancy, that's been looked at. I mean, these here aren't really like go in and fix a tenant or something like that, where you got so many different variables. The city will know that it's a K25 ESFR as opposed to the K14. You have a good point, though, on all the different sprinklers out there. The industry tried to police itself by coming up with a SIN number. I don't know if that's an appropriate acronym, but the SIN stands for Sprinkler Identification Number, and you would mark on there basically like a 5 to 9 digit symbol to let anyone know, is it upright, pendant, quick response, extended coverage, what temperature, and all that kind of stuff. And it was just so difficult to try to get everybody to figure out how to work that. They dropped it in committee. and they say they're thinking about reviewing it again for 1999. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case. And you do bring up a good point. I get beat up on that everywhere I go. It's just like, you guys make too doggone many sprinklers. And there's so many different manufacturers. We don't know what's going on. And you know what I say a lot is, there's a whole bunch of different detectors out there. There's a whole bunch of different smoke alarms out there. This is a smart industry. Okay? We are doing special things now. It's not just half-inch Schedule 40 done. We have evolved into a very, very intelligent industry. And I think we really do have to approach it that way, that every system is special, and you have to look at it, just like a computer. And they continually evolve. It doesn't work with the old software. You have to just keep going with it. I want to thank you all very much for inviting me to come here and speak with you tonight. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to contact me or my office. We have a technical services department that I want you to consider as a resource. It doesn't have to be central. It doesn't have to be sprinklers. We have members on 231, 231C, NFPA 13, NFSA, AFSA. We're covering the gamut, and we have 5 people sitting on phones who do nothing but deal with technical service or fire protection. Please use us as a resource. Thank you very much.